some questions and you can certainly get those questions answered. Does that sound good?
Great.
Awesome. All right. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to Jennifer Blankfein, who will lead this wonderful discussion for us. Go ahead, Jen.
Yay. Thank you so much, Louisa and Thrity. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so happy to have you and just very excited. You know, when I was telling people that I had asked you to join us to discuss your new book, everyone said, oh my gosh, The Space Between Us was my favorite book and I can't wait to read Honor. And so you really are doing something right because everyone's very excited to have you here. So on behalf of this whole group, I welcome you.
Thank you. It's terrific to be here, and it's for our Thursday evening to see so many people zooming in. It's delightful.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the pandemic. That gave us this special opportunity to be able to really connect with authors and with each other without having to put on shoes.
Yeah. So sometimes in some cases pants, although I assure you I have pants on.
That's true. It's funny.
Yeah.
I did have pajama pants on and then I said, you know what? I really need to wear regular pants. I like to be dressed.
Yeah, I always think with my luck, something will go wrong with technology and I'll have to get up and everybody will see my jammies, you know.
That's right.
So, yeah.
That's right. So I'd like to start out just by reading a little bit about you, because first we want to talk about you before we get to the book. Okay. So I'm just going to read a little bit about from your bio. Thrity Umrigar is the best-selling author of the novels Bombay Time, The Space Between Us, If Today Be Sweet, The Weight of Heaven, The World We Found, The Story Hour, Everybody's Son, and The Secrets Between Us. Her new novel, Honor, is an indie next list pick for January 2022. Umrigar is also the author of the memoir First Darling of the Morning and 3 children's picture books, When I Carried You in My Belly, Sugar and Milk, and Binny's Diwali. Her books have been translated into several languages and published in over 15 countries. She is a distinguished university professor of English at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. Thrity was born in Bombay, India, and came to the US when she was 21. As a Parsi child attending a Catholic school in a predominantly Hindu country, she had the kind of schizophrenic and cosmopolitan childhood that has served her well in her life as a writer. Accused by teachers and parents alike of being a daydreaming, head-in-the-clouds child, she grew up lost in the fictional worlds created by Steinbeck, Hemingway, Woolf, and Faulkner. She would emerge long enough from these books to create her own fictional and poetic worlds. Encouraged by her practical-minded parents to get an undergraduate degree in business, Thrity survived business school by creating a drama club and writing and directing and acting in plays. Her first short stories, essays, and poems were published in national magazines and newspapers in India at age 15. After earning an MA in journalism in the US, Thrity worked for several years as an award-winning reporter, columnist, and magazine writer. She also earned a PhD in English. In 1999, Thrity won a 1-year Nieman Fellowship to Harvard University, which is given to mid-career journalists. Thrity is active on the National Lecture Circuit and has spoken at book festivals such as the LA Festival of Books, the Tucson Book Festival, and the Miami Book Fair International, at universities such as MIT, Harvard University, and Spelman College, and at literary societies, civic and business organizations, and public libraries all across the country. So
that's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful, but it's really impressive. And I didn't want to leave anything out because I know we have a lot of creative people that come to our book clubs, and there are actors and drama people and writers. And so it's nice to hear that you do a little of everything. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your time as a journalist and also the Nieman Fellowship, what that was about.
So I'll start with the second question because it's the more fun question, I think. I've always said that the Nieman Fellowship is God's gift to, if not humankind, certainly to that part of humankind that decides to become reporters and editors and photographers and people like that. It's basically, as you mentioned, it's a fellowship that's given to mid-career, which I think is a polite way of saying middle-aged journalists. And basically, it gives you a year of study at Harvard in the field and subjects of your choosing. You know, all you need to do is approach the professor and ask to be allowed to enroll in their class. Most of them are thrilled to have Nieman Fellows in their classes because it's a very well-established, it's an old and well-established fellowship at Harvard. And you basically get to, you know, read with the most, you know, people that I used to just hear about or see on TV, like Skip Gates. You know, suddenly you're in his class, and or Cornell West, you know, and it was an amazing experience. And what made it even more worthwhile for me is one of the secret reasons why that wasn't on any of my application forms, why I applied to it is, you know, I had finished my PhD a few years prior to that, and I had started writing this first novel, which ended up being Bombay Time, I think actually while I was working on the PhD. So I was working full-time at a paper in Akron as a reporter, a daily reporter. I was going to school in the evenings, which is not a good way to get a PhD. And I was writing my first novel. So the predictable thing happened where it didn't come crashing down. Actually, I managed to juggle all this, but I had to make a decision between finishing the dissertation or finishing the novel. I decided to finish the dissertation. That seemed easier in some ways. But that novel that I had put aside kept nagging me. So when I saw this on the bulletin board at work, I think 2 days before the application was due, in true backbencher, you know, meet the deadline by the skin of your teeth form, and I needed letters of recommendation and all that. I think my poor editor pulled an all-nighter writing me a letter. I just decided to apply, and the secret plot was I would do whatever my obligations were over there, should I be lucky enough to get it. But I wanted to take a second stab at the novel. That was really important to me. So not only did the Nieman Fellowship open up, you know, this whole academic world to me, but what it also did was it gave me the time, for the first time in my adult life, to actually, you know, I'm going to interrupt myself. I feel like I'm taking some deep breaths here. I'm recovering from a small surgery. So if I sound a little more subdued than I typically would be, I'll just full disclosure, if that's the reason why. So please forgive me a little bit if I stop every once in a while and just draw a breath. But that's how Bombay Time ended up being my first novel. I wrote it, I would get up really, really early, 4:30, you know, 5 in the morning, write for as long as I could, then start the day and do a whole day of classes and all that, and all the other obligations that being a Nieman Fellow entailed. And then something ridiculously lucky happened, which was I was attending a poetry reading off campus at Emerson College for another writer. And I asked a really pedestrian question during the Q&A. And on the basis of that question, this woman approached me and said, I'm a literary agent. Are you a writer? Are you working on something? And at that time, I probably had 4 or 5 chapters written, if that. And I said, actually, as a matter of fact, I am. And she asked to see them. And it was great, you know, for a beginner writer who didn't have any kind of a support system around me. You know, I wasn't an MFA student. I just didn't have that background. I just had a background in writing every single day for the last, you know, at that time, almost 12 or 13 years. So I would just finish a chapter and stick it in the mail and send it off to her. And all she said was, keep writing, keep writing. That's what I did. And before I returned to my job at the end of that amazing year, I had a book contract and an agent, you know. These
Wow.
things don't happen too often. It truly was just random good luck, but that good luck was also supported by the desire to work hard and to take that opportunity. You know, so sometimes we get opportunities, sometimes we make opportunities. I think in this case, I just got an opportunity, but boy, did I work hard after the fact, you know,
Right.
after I got
Well, it was really life-changing, because you hear about authors who, you know, write their books and they're out trying to get agents, and
agents.
they just can't, and
Right.
time goes by.
Yeah.
And this kind of came to you, which is really, it was the
just-
sign.
As I've always said, just ridiculous good luck, you know,
Yeah.
good fortune. And truly, to be perfectly candid, being in the right place at the right time. You know, that same book, if I'd never applied for the Neiman, if I'd written it sitting in Ohio and done what most people do, which is just, you know, send out query letters to agents, who knows, you know, the course of my life could have been very different. Yeah.
But you did back it up with lots of other novels and writing that have been successful. So I'm sure that that person is happy that they made that decision to pull you in at that time.
I hope so.
I'm sure, right? All right, that's a great story. So my next question to you is, how in general do you decide what you want to write about, and what inspired you to write honor?
Yeah. I don't know that I decide what I want to write about next. I think the book makes that decision, or the idea of the book makes that decision for me. So on any, you know, you send me on a 45-minute walk and my brain just does this automatically. I'll come back with 3 ideas, you know. So every day on a walk, I can come up with 3 or 4 or 5 ideas. And obviously, most of them don't ever see the light of day, and they certainly don't appear in a book. But once in a while, you get an idea, and it sticks with you. It haunts you in some way, you know. You can't help but think about it almost obsessively over and over again. And that could just be over the course of a few days, you know. And when that happens, to me, that's the test, you know. Does it have that kind of staying power? Is it interesting enough that it interests me? Because I'm going to devote the next several years of my life to that project. It better hold my interest, because if it doesn't hold mine, why would I expect it to hold anyone else's interest, right? So I think books have a way of finding you. And I'll tell you how honor came to be. I think it was maybe it was 2015 or 2016. Ellen Berry, who writes for the New York Times, was stationed in South Asia at the time, and she did a series of marvelous articles about, mostly about rural India. So she did this one amazing article about the conditions of women who wanted to seek employment outside the home in this small, isolated village. That made a deep impression on me. I just couldn't believe what these women had to put up with from this really patriarchal, traditional culture that did not allow women to work outside the home. She did another very interesting article that just talked about the corruption in the police force, in the court system. And, you know, even though I was born and raised there, I grew up in Bombay. And to be perfectly honest, I grew up in a fairly sheltered, you know, middle-class home. So I was interested in these issues because I'm interested in these issues anywhere in the world. But my interest only went so far as reading about them, you know, most of the time being in the West and just reading about them and understanding them to some extent. But these articles were really eye-opening for me. Well, while I was reading a few of them, I thought to myself, she's such a visual writer. somebody should make a movie out of these stories. I mean, these would make for great movies, right? Didn't see myself in this process at all. But again, I couldn't stop thinking about these stories, and slowly this idea emerged about a book about honor killings and, women who have had no power in their lives, no agency, finding their voice, speaking out, taking actions that position them in opposition to the cultures that they spring from. And then what would the consequences of that be? Who would pay the price for those decisions? All those things just swirled in my head, probably for a couple of years, because I was working on a different project at that time. And then I just knew I had to tell this story, and once Mina, one of the two protagonists, once she came to me in her own voice, that's when I knew for sure that I had to write about her.
So 2 questions. One, does Ellen Barry know the impact that her work has had for you? Have you been in touch with her?
Yes. In fact, I did one of these sessions with her where she interviewed me. And
That's incredible.
I just sat there pinching myself for that entire hour. I had written to her. I don't know her personally, but I had written to her before the book came out, just telling her that I had written this book and it was largely inspired, by her stories. And she was blown away. Nothing like that had ever happened to her before. And it was like bucket list stuff to be interviewed by her.
Wow, I bet. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So have you ever visited a village like the one that is the setting of this book?
Maybe not exactly that kind of a village, but I've certainly, traveled through the countryside in India. Yeah. But, not for this book, just earlier,
Right.
drawing on memories,
Now, these little villages, the women don't have much say, but the men are trying to be honorable, right? I mean, that seems like their goal. They are standing up for their honor, for their traditions, for their religion, but it doesn't feel honorable.
Results.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is the trouble with writing books close to one another. I can't remember if this is a line from Honor or it's from the book that I'm writing right now. It might be the latter, actually, where I have a line that says something like, no person is a villain in their own story. Yeah. And I really believe that. I think most of us find ways to justify an entire range of human behavior, Nobody thinks they are the bad guy in a story. And I think this is very much true for Mina's brothers, for instance. They have all these justifications. And I think they're deeply held beliefs. But you also have to understand that these are men with zero to very little education, formal education. They themselves have not been exposed to the larger world outside their own lives and their own villages and their own customs. So if I really, really wanted to, I could muster up a certain amount of sympathy for them too. There's a hierarchy. Somebody like Mina is perhaps on the lowest rung, but they are not men of privilege. They are not men of education. They themselves have been victims of this system. And this is one of my core beliefs, that oppression hurts certainly the oppressed, but it also hurts the oppressor. And you kind of see that, although it doesn't seem like in the book there's any real consequence for them. But as middle-class readers, we can certainly look at them and say, why wouldn't they believe these antiquated ideas because they have no sense of the larger world and how it has moved on and left people like them behind.
Yeah. Yeah. Now your characters are so deep and layered. How do you develop your characters? Do they just come as you're writing, or do you actually sit down and say, okay, my main character is going to be Mina, and these are her attributes, and this, what's the process for
Well,
coming
I
up
never
with
sit down.
characters? You never sit down.
I never sit down. When I'm writing a book, like I never sit in front of a blank screen and say, what am I going to write today? I'm always doing, I'll wash dishes, I'll go for a walk, I'll take a long shower, I'll write dialogue, while I'm in the shower. I just do these weird things so that by the time I do sit down in front of the computer, I know exactly, or at least I have some good idea of how I'm going to work that day. So the way I develop characters is the way I develop friendship. I hang out with those people a lot. I just spend time with them. And it is like in real life, it's like friendship. The more you spend time with somebody, the closer you become, the more you understand them. Some days they have 2 glasses of wine and they slip and they'll tell you something about their backstory or their lives that will open them up to you in a whole new way, right? This is what happens in our interactions with other human beings. And that's exactly what I try and do with my characters. I'll know things about my characters that will never make their way into the final book. And that's fine, but whatever line I write, whatever I have them say is informed by all that, but by their entire backstory.
So your 2 main characters, Mina and Smita, are different, but they do have some similarities. And I would imagine that it might have been easier for you to connect with Smita just because she was a journalist, and it seemed like a character that we would understand more. How did you get into both of their heads, and specifically Mina, because she spoke to us directly?
These are really insightful questions, if I may just say that to you. You're absolutely right. Mina's character was much, much harder. She felt, I wouldn't say alien, but I had a harder time capturing her voice. I knew very early on that Mina would speak to us in the first person. That was a decision that I made very early on. And the reason for that was, Mina's whole story is that she is silenced, right? She's silenced by the culture. She's silenced by that head of the village. She's silenced by her brothers. I didn't want to be party to that. I didn't want to be yet another person who would silence her or even filter her through my own language and my own words. So I knew early on that she would speak directly to the reader in the first person. The question became, what would she say? And I pictured Mina as this really young woman, a little timid, a little shy, very tenuous, but also with this nerve and courage that was certainly bigger than anything that I possess in my life, where she's willing to buck all systems for the sake of love. So I wanted to capture that duality. And I also felt like Mina should speak to us in a different idiom than, say, somebody like Smita would. Her language construction would somehow be different. And there's a kind of music that's there in that rawness of language, where somebody's not trying to be smart or sophisticated. They're just speaking from the heart to you. Kind of simplicity that is its own kind of beauty. And I just wanted to do all those things. I have no idea if any of that came through in the book itself, but that was the bar that I kept trying to set for myself. Smita's passages were easier, some for reasons that you have said. You know, I can identify with her. We sort of grew up in similar kind of homes. I mean, not the same religion and all, but socioeconomically speaking, in more or less the same kind of, you know, milieu. She is a journalist. I was, so those things felt familiar, and hers is a third person omniscient voice. So definitely, you know, that was easier.
So Mina, her voice was very beautiful. She was a beautiful kind of person. And I think you did a great job with her voice, because if we had seen her physically, she probably wasn't quite as attractive because of her injuries. But when you're reading her voice, you can kind of forget about what she was on the outside and really concentrate on the kind of person she was from the inside.
Great. I had never thought of that, but now I'm going to steal that line for future interviews. Yeah, that's the reason why.
Right. It works very well. I really enjoyed reading her voice, you know, hearing her voice. So they both had issues with their home, their country, right? They were both rejected by what they called home. And Smita had privilege, and she left and she had a new life, right?
Right.
But Mina did not have that opportunity. So she just fought till the end.
Right.
You write about characters that have different levels of privilege, whether it's men or women. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that's, you know, I think that's perhaps one of the common themes in a lot of my novels. Is I do seem to be a little obsessed with the idea of not just privilege, but power, you know, just power differentials, like who has power in any society, who doesn't, you know, how do the powerful use their power? How do the powerless fight back against the use of that power, which often is not used in healthy ways? And that, you know, as somebody who feels pretty well versed in more than one culture. I mean, I've lived in the US my entire adult life. I feel like I know this culture really well. You know, in some ways there are obvious, huge differences between a poor country like India and a relatively well-to-do country like the US. But more and more, the older I get, I don't know if I'm changing or if our culture is changing, I see more and more parallels too, you know. And this question of power dynamics, just maybe it's true in all human interactions, you know, but I'm certainly interested not just in class, but also increasingly in cultural differences, you know, in racial differences, national differences, gendered power differentials. All these seem to me as sort of stand-ins for how most societies operate, at least the two societies that I'm most familiar with, you know, the US and India.
Popping in because there are just a couple of comments around the idea of not physically seeing Mina and how that's powerful. So Debbie just was agreeing with your comment, Jan, that she agrees it was better not to see it. It was a richer experience. And Amy was saying that it's actually a better book than movie for that reason, because many of the scenes are too traumatic to envision. Sort of to that point, Bree is asking, how did you not become bitter and angry while creating this story? She found herself becoming so angry and invested in Mina's well-being and lack of justice for her. And I'll get to some of the other questions you asked a little bit later, just so you guys know.
Well, that's an awfully big assumption on, is it Amy's part?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. that I'm not a bitter and angry
Oh,
person,
yeah.
you know. Yeah. But I don't know. I felt angry when I read the journalistic articles, by Ellen. I felt very angry and very shocked and very dismayed at that time. I don't know. I don't remember feeling angry when I was writing the novel. I think I felt very sad at times when I was writing it. Um, I guess that's the answer. I don't know why. It was easier to feel angry reading somebody else's work than reading my own work. But I just felt this overwhelming sense of, will things ever change kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were talking a little bit about differences and cultural differences, and I'm wondering about journalism and journalists and the cultural differences between American journalists versus Indian journalists and how they might tell the story differently.
This is where I'll go back to my experience during the Neiman year. So one thing I forgot to mention to you guys is, so it's there are 12 international fellows each year, and there are 12 American journalists each year. I was part of that latter group. And we were an unusually close-knit and fun class. I mean, we just bonded immediately upon getting there. And, it's 24 journalists from all around the world. There was copious amounts of drinking and eating out and all that kind of stuff. And we were usually more or less on the same page on a lot of issues. The big divide between the American group and the international group was over the question of objectivity in journalism. All of us who were trained in the American, came out of American J schools or whatever, all swore by objectivity, as the hallmark of journalism. Almost to the last person, the international fellows disagreed. Many of them came from countries that had experienced civil wars and revolutions and, were ruled by not very nice people. Their whole thing was advocacy journalism. They saw being objective and equally presenting both sides without any nuance as a kind of cop-out, and they just didn't think that that's the way the world really functioned, and that they saw it as selling out. I spent that whole year ping-ponging between the two sides on this question. And I can't say that I came out of there with any firm convictions one way, but I could really see the merits and the demerits on both sides of the equation. So all those years later, when I wrote this book, and with Smita being a journalist, I just took all my confusion about this issue and dumped it on her. And I thought, you deal with it now. I've spent enough time dealing with it. It's your turn now. Because she doesn't know either. And she travels with this fellow, Mohan, who's not a journalist. And he's a carefree, easygoing, good-natured guy. And he just can't understand. Like, if you could give somebody money and feed them for a month, why on earth would you not do it? It seems so easy and simple to him. But of course, he's not governed by the same ethics that Smita is. But then to complicate matters further, Smita then has to ask herself, do the rules of American journalism that were created in, affluent, upper middle class, highly cultured white men, way back a century ago, can you apply those rules to somebody living in a hut the way Meena and her mother-in-law do? Like, does that even, where is the morality, right? So yeah, those were the questions that I had poor Smita have to tackle.
Yeah, and you did not give us the answer for sure.
I don't know the answer.
Yeah. she and her relationship with Mohan, even though he's not a journalist, she represents more of what Americans are like, and he represents a non-American. He has a more romantic kind of way about him, and she's more cut and dry, a little colder. But it seems like as they become friends and they spend time together, they both sort of seep into each other a little bit.
Yeah.
Which I loved how they were learning from each other.
Yeah, I think these are great insights, and I thank you for them. I mean, you're really, it's seldom that a writer gets the opportunity to hear back from a reader and has the satisfaction of knowing that what you intended to do in a novel actually came through. Yeah, I think they both start somewhere here, and towards the end of the novel, if not here, they're somewhere here. They definitely move closer. You know, Mohan too. I mean, Mohan is an innocent in some ways, but that's not an excuse, you know, and he knows that, and he learns that, and he stops just parroting, you know, greatest country in the world kind of jargon that he was raised with, you know. He has to confront his own privilege also.
Yeah, I mean, there was one line in the book that talked about India as the country. Let me just see if I can find it. Oh, after a few seconds, she cracked the window slightly, and India rode in on the night air and entered the car, a third passenger who she suddenly realized had been present from the moment she met Mohan. So he was really intertwined so much with the country. And so she couldn't feel like she hated the country if she was falling in love with him.
Right.
So he was sort of facilitating her love of her home again.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I just want to lift up Bree's comment because it's mirroring exactly what you're talking about. She says, I felt Mohan brought out her love for India and married it to her comfort of her cultural awareness of America, coming to terms with some of her demons.
Yeah, beautifully said. Yeah, I think that's true. I think Mohan becomes a stand-in for all that she has always admired and loved about the culture, but has not allowed herself to remember for 20 years because she can't. I mean, it's easier to love or to hate. You know, being in the middle is confusing for a lot of people. And I think Smita has done that to herself, you know.
Amy says, I felt like the book had to blend the beauty of India with the atrocities that happen there and around the world, that each of the characters had to get a place where they can appreciate that blend or had to get to a place. And Smita from her past as well needs to see both sides of that. That was what Mina's child was supposed to represent, is what Amy's saying. And I just want to bring up, Monica asked a question earlier about Seema's past, and maybe we can bring that up now, if that's okay. She's asking, why did Smita's neighbor reveal the family's hiding place? What did she stand to gain by doing so?
Has everybody here, are we assuming everybody's read the book and no, so spoilers are okay?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if I have an easy answer to that question. I think she felt lied to, is one, by her best friend, you know, Smita's mom. She was affronted that she was not included in the secret. I think because of the rioting on the streets and everything that was happening, and the fact that they were the only Muslim family in this affluent apartment building, I think she was trying to ingratiate herself with the mob, with the thugs, you know, as a way of protecting her own family. And I think that happens, you know, in times of war, in times of rioting, in times of chaos. People sell each other out for personal gain. And I think all those factors, and remember, she has to make that decision fast, right? After the phone call. I mean, she probably gets on the phone right away. So it's not like she ruminates and ponders what to do for days. She just acts on that impulse of outrage, of being betrayed, of being lied to. All those things gather within her, and she betrays her best friend and the family.
For me, I kind of equated that to like during the Holocaust, where, you know, if the people in Germany knew that there were Jews hiding and they were going to be in danger if it was found out that they knew, you know, so they sold out.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a phenomena that probably happens in every corner of the world, you know, where people just switch, and in order to protect their own, they will sell somebody else out, you know. And I think that's exactly what she does. What I find even more egregious, I mean, you know, maybe self-preservation is something that's so innate to human nature that we should not criticize or judge her too harshly for that, for what she does, although I do, but maybe we shouldn't. But the fact that she keeps some of the jewelry that has been entrusted to her in some, you know, this is after the fact, after they have returned and converted, that feels really shameful to me, and it says something about her character that's not good. You know,
Right. That was her opportunity to say, you know, I'm really sorry. I had to do this for my own safety. Please forgive me.
right,
By giving
right.
her all the jewelry that would have said those types of things. And she just chose not to
Yeah.
take that road, which was
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah, and I'll tell you a quick story that might even explain how Smita became part of this book, because, you know, Smita's creation as a character is very much entwined with the what happens in the early 1990s and what happens to her family. And so I had been in the US for a good 10 years or more when those riots happened. But they shook me up. And they shook me up because all of us who grew up in a city like Bombay, you know, Western, cosmopolitan, genuinely a multicultural society. You know, the closest city to compare it to would be New York, you know, that same kind of mad energy on the streets. We just grew up thinking whatever happens in the rest of India, you know, they can fight amongst themselves. We are immune to that. This, you know, and it was true that for a very long time, the kind of rioting and the periodic violence that, you know, between different religions that you would see in the rest of the country, never really saw that in Bombay. And then it happened, you know, and whether you were living there or not, I think some sense of identity, some sense of what you thought was true just disappeared overnight. It just got shattered, you know. My parents were still there at that time, and my dad told me the story on the phone one day about, we happened to have neighbors who were Muslim. I'm not Hindu or Muslim. I belong to this tiny religion. We're known as the Parsis in India. Zoroastrianism is the name of the religion. You don't need to know all that. But we are so small that nobody bothers us, basically. You know, we're not big enough to be a threat to anyone. Anyway, the Muslim neighbors knocked on the door. They were going to leave for a few days. And a lot of people in India keep gold and other jewelry at home. They brought this whole thing and asked my dad if he would keep it for them. So my father took them to the safe or whatever, removed all his stuff, cleared all his stuff out of that, had the guy himself put the bag in my father's safe. He locked it, and then he gave them the key to his safe and said, whenever you're ready to come back, bring the key, come back yourself, open it yourself, and take everything away. This is in contrast to that character in the book, you know. And, you know, my father just told me the story in a very matter-of-fact way. he didn't think he had done anything great. But I just remember listening to this on the phone and thinking, you are a really good guy. Like to have thought of that at a time like this, it, and somehow that story had always stayed with me, but I always thought of it as a personal story, as a family story, with no repercussions or impact beyond that. But then when I was thinking of Smita's character and what had damaged her so that she was so, reluctant to even return to India for an assignment, all this came back to me, and I decided to make that part of the story. So it's amazing, you can hear something 20, 30 years prior and never think of it as literary material. And then someday it becomes that.
Wow, so you just must store a lot of information.
Useless information, yes.
Well, maybe it will have use in some book sometime.
Sometime, yes.
It's amazing. I just want to ask you a little bit about the mother-in-law. So she was a difficult character to understand, because you would expect that she would have love for her grandchild, and she didn't exhibit it in the way that I wanted her to. Can you talk about her a little bit?
Yeah, it's hard for me to know if she's just a selfish person or if the trauma of losing really two sons for all practical purposes, and one in a particularly gruesome way, has just changed her, And I can understand, not excuse, but I can understand her dislike for Meena. She blames Meena for the loss of her son, right? If he had never married outside the religion, they would have been fine, I mean, this is just short-sighted thinking, but this is thinking. So I can understand that. Why? I'm not even sure that she doesn't love Abru, the little child. I think Abru reminds her. She looks a lot like her dad, so it reminds me of her son. And sometimes I'm sure that gives her comfort and solace, and then at other times she doesn't want anything to do with it. The scene at the very end when she signs the paper and leaves without so much of a second glance at her granddaughter, I think at this time she's just a broken woman. I mean, she feels like she has lost everything. This last thing that has happened is a bridge too far. And she's an older person, and all she wants to do now is live out her life without any more attachments or complications. I think she's just been driven to that point. And I'm saying all this as if she's a likable character, or that I feel like I'm sticking up for her, but I didn't like her at all when I was writing her either. So,
is that fun to write a character that you don't like, or would you rather? It is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. You just don't want to get too swept up and, have it be a caricature,
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you were writing this book during the pandemic and while everyone was quarantined or after, but how did what was going on in our world affect the process and the story?
I actually wrote it just before the pandemic hit, or at least, I mean, I did revisions during the pandemic, but I had a good first draft down before that. The pandemic, I mean, I wrote another book during the pandemic, and it didn't, for writers, I don't think the pandemic made any difference, because this is how we live. When you're writing a book, you are in quarantine, you are in isolation, you're sitting at your desk and you're doing work by yourself, So, I mean, obviously I'm being facetious, but in terms of the writing itself, I don't think it made a big difference. You know, I also wrote the book though during the Trump years, and I would say that had more of an impact on the book. Just that sense of, wow, life and societies can really change fast. You know, going back to the question of the neighbor and why she betrays her closest friend. People can change on a dime, you know, and if people can change, then societies can change on a dime. And I think that weighed more. That was the shadow on the book more than the pandemic.
Wow. All right.
Susan?
Why do you think this book and all of your books seem to resonate with so many people?
Why do I think they do?
Yeah, why do you think they do?
I don't have a clue.
You don't know.
I mean, I'm not even sure if I agree with the premise. I hope they do. And if they do, I'm thankful for that. But, you know, I try and tell the truth. I mean, the way I understand it, of course, the way I understand the truth about human beings, human nature, how societies function. I may not be the most lyrical writer or the prettiest writer or the most erudite writer. I try and be as emotionally honest as I know how in my books. And maybe other people pick up on that. That's the most I can say about
Yeah.
that.
I mean, I know for me, your writing isn't like a nice little story that wraps up in the end, you know, and that's it. It's kind of shows the dichotomy of everything, of human nature, of government, of politics, of culture. So I think that people can see themselves, they can relate to it, they can relate to, you know, their own surroundings and how it's similar in some ways and different in some ways. So it gives people a lot to think about.
Yeah, and I always love it when American readers, you know, for whom the worlds that I'm describing are so far away. I mean, they may as well be on a different planet at times. And yet there's that human thread that you can always tease out of any story, right? And connect it to your own life. And I love it when people do that because it reminds me of the mirror image of that or the reverse of that. When I was a teenager in India with no ambition or no dreams or no idea that I would end up a few years later in America. But my staple was American writers. You know, that's what I was reading. And it, you know, so I'm reading about Cannery Row, Steinbeck's California. I don't think it ever once occurred to me that I was reading about a strange and alien place because I was so caught up with the storytelling, with the lives of the characters, that it felt recognizably human to me, even though I was quite young. I was 15 and 16 years old. But something in those books felt so human to me. And the part that felt human was precisely what you said. It was that duality of human nature. And when you're a teenager, like learning about yourself for the first time, you know, the thing that books teaches you is everything else that you've been told in your life about good is good and bad is bad. And, you know, there's just one, you know, life is complicated. Human beings are complex creatures. And for me, no medium has proven that to me as much as books have, you know. And I remember, maybe even younger than 15, that sense of relief that one feels. Oh, I'm not the first person on the planet who was angry at my parents or who said some bad things under my breath about them when I ran away back to my room. Other people have done that too. Okay, that doesn't make me a freak. It just makes me human, you know? That kind of recognition that books give you. I certainly experienced it over and over again. So now, all these years later, to find readers traveling with me to India and making connections about their own lives, their own societies, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why they say, you know, reading fiction, it makes you more empathetic.
Right.
It really does. It gives you a lot to think about and understanding other people. And I think your books do that in a big way. So thank you for that. All right, I have a few other little questions. Here, this is the cover. Can you tell us about the cover? How did the cover come about? Did you have anything to do with it, or
none whatsoever?
None. Okay.
The art department designed it. At first, I wasn't quite sure what to make of it, to be perfectly honest. You know, mangoes and India, it's such a tired trope. I was a little worried about it being stereotypical. Oh, Susan, you want to say something?
All I wanted to say, but that's so beautiful because that's what he gives Mina, right?
I've come to, that's what my editor told me. You know, I said, why? What? Mangoes are not a big deal in this book, you know? And she reminded me of that scene and how pivotal that scene was. And I'll be honest with you, I love the cover now. I think I almost believe that the book has sold well because of the jacket more than anything else, you know. I really do like the jacket a lot. It's very striking, but it took a little getting used to for me.
That's very funny. Yeah, I happen to love the cover. And the copy that I have has the Reese Witherspoon, the book club emblem on it. So that was a big honor, I'm sure. Funny for you. How did you find out about that? And how did you interview with Reese? Does she or anything? You know, no connection with her at all?
Emails, a few emails, but after the fact, I think. No, not true. Before the announcement. So I actually knew about the fact that she was going to pick it for January. I found out on my birthday in September.
Oh, wow.
I got an email from my editor saying, we need to talk. And I thought, oh God, she's leaving. I don't want to get this news on my birthday. So I tried like saying, can we talk on Monday maybe? Or she's like, no. We're setting up a Zoom call. We need to talk today. So I was like, oh God, she doesn't know it's my birthday. I had this nice day planned. And it's all gonna get ruined, you know. And there were like 6 of them on the screen and they're just beaming. And, you know, they told me, and, you know, I was happy, of course. I didn't have a clue what it meant or what it would do. I mean, I knew anything is better than nothing. I knew that much, but mostly I was so happy for them because they are the ones who must have done the outreach and made the effort, I think. And they were all so genuinely pleased that it really lifted my spirits also.
That's funny because it seems like it meant more to them than it meant to you.
That makes it sound as if I don't appreciate what what the Reese Book Club has done for the book. It's certainly done better because of that. And I just think, I mean, this is an example of somebody who uses her power and influence to really try and do good in the world, to uplift other women and other writers. And I think it's a splendid, splendid thing that she does, you know. But in that initial moment, I guess nothing had sunk in, and all I could do was just look at these beaming faces on my screen and rejoice with them.
Right. Well, it is great news. It does open up to a whole different audience that might not have been aware of the book. So it, you know, it can only be great. Yeah. So that's an exciting thing. Now, I know we mentioned, or somebody mentioned something about a movie, right? That they didn't know if this would be movie material because of some of the scenes. I'm sure it could be adapted so that it would work fine. But I just wondered if any of your books have any movie activity going on.
Yeah, actually, there is something, but I've been down this road. You know, many of my books have been optioned in the past, but just being optioned doesn't mean that they get made. So far, nothing has, you know, the financing. You know, I write about sad and depressing topics, so maybe getting funding for books like this is a little harder than something cheery and, you know, light. But there is this director and screenwriter in India who's quite well respected. She's not Bollywood, she's the indie. And she loves Space Between Us and the sequel, Secrets Between Us. And she's told me a million times. I mean, yeah, those two, that's right, thank you. She has worked tirelessly throughout the pandemic even, trying to get interest and trying to get financing. And she's ready to go, you know, and she keeps telling me, I'm never going to give up. This was the movie I was meant to do. So, you know, I guess that's the thing about getting old is like, you only, you know, you just write it out and see what happens.
Right. And maybe even a Broadway show, right?
Oh.
I saw The Kite Runner is now going to be a Broadway
Is
show.
that so? I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah.
A musical,
Oh.
no less.
You what?
It's a musical, no less.
It's a musical.
They're making a
Really?
musical, yeah, I'm pretty sure. I popped in because we're talking about some of your other books, Thrity, and Brett is asking, do you recommend any books that you feel may have been more underappreciated that we should read?
Somebody else's books or my books?
No, yours.
Oh, mine? I like, well, I like two of mine. I like a book called The Weight of Heaven. It's a serious subject in that it deals with a young American couple who have lost their child. So if this is a sensitive issue for anybody, don't read it. But I like what that book stands for, what it says, what it explores. And then there's another book, and this is, I think, much lighter, called The World We Found. And that's the story of these 4 women and 2 of their male partners, their husbands. So it's a story told in 6 voices. And it's set in, you know, contemporary times, but they meet as college students, as young activists, student activists in the 70s in India. And the story is about the different paths and different journeys. You know, one of them has ended up in the US. One of them has married this Muslim guy who is one of their group, you know, progressive groups when they are all in college. But over the years, he has gotten more fundamentalist, not in a violent way, but just more religious and more orthodox, I guess you could say, in his religion. You know, it's a story about, you know, the idealism of the 60s and 70s when all these people thought they were going to change the world, and in fact the world changed them to some extent, you know. I think that's a good read.
Do you read your own books after
Never.
they're finished?
Never.
I
mean, maybe to read a passage or so, you know, for a forum like this, but I'm petrified. I know what would happen. I would just find fault with every line on every page. So why do that to myself?
Right, don't torture yourself. What are you working on now?
I'm just finishing a book that's really the story of a son and the mother that he's estranged from. And upon a return home, he learns some family secrets that really makes him reevaluate not just his relationship with her, but really a lot of his life, you know. So it's very different from Honor. It's a more intimate, it's a family saga, you know, in some ways.
And do you find it just as easy to write from a male perspective as a female?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I mean, I always say if people can write science fiction,
Right,
you know, everything is easy after that.
right. He's human, so you can
Yeah.
connect as a
Yeah.
human.
Exactly. Which is why, this whole argument about should writers write about other races, about other cultures. I just feel like if you get to the humanity that's at the core of most of us, and if you work, that's the starting point, and then if you work out from there, I think it's doable, and I think we should do it. I mean, again, I'm somebody who grew up reading white male American writers for the most part, and it doesn't seem to have harmed me all that much.
Right. It's an interesting topic, American Dirt.
Mhm.
That book was, there was so much controversy over that. The last book club that we did here with Book Nation was The Personal Librarian. And that was written by Marie Benedict, and she did not want to write from a Black perspective. So she had Victoria Christopher Murray write with her so that she could make sure that she didn't say anything that was not correct. So she was afraid to do it. And maybe she became afraid after what happened with
Right.
Jeannie Cummings at American Dirt with so much backlash. I don't know.
Right, right. It's an understandable period in history that we are going through as an industry, as a culture, as a field. I can only hope it's not a permanent change. I think you agree, Susan. Yeah. I mean, I understand. It's like that objective journalism stuff. There's a little element of truth on both sides, but at some point, if writers are told what not to write about, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. What are you reading now? Do you read when you're writing? Do you also read for enjoyment? And what do you read?
Yeah, pretty much so. I don't think I just finished that book, Olga Dies Dreaming, which is done so well. I liked it a lot. I'm reading a collection of short stories right now, and I'm going to flub the name. It's People from Elsewhere or Something from Elsewhere. It's a debut collection by a youngish Indian American writer, and I've just started it and I'm enjoying it immensely.
Nice. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions before we wrap up here? If anyone wants to put a question in the chat, they can. How can we follow you if we want to know what you're doing?
I have an author's page on Facebook. I have a Twitter feed. I guess those are the two. Periodically when I'm not feeling lazy, I'll update my website, although I did do a good update so I'll keep posting. There'll be a lot more Zoom book club and other dates. So I'll keep trying to update that in the future.
Great. Okay.
So Brett is asking, what do you think about audiobooks? And then Jill piped in that she listened to Honor as an audiobook and loved it.
Yeah.
Do you want to weigh in, Thrity, about audiobooks?
Yeah, I love audiobooks. And the woman who reads Honor for my audiobook she's done it for several of my books. I was lucky enough to be given a choice of who to pick, and I just went right back to her. She's a marvelous reader, I think. And initially they had wanted to hire more than one person to do, I guess, Meena and Smita's sections at least. And, she was so effortless at doing both voices that, that's a compliment, right? When the publisher starts off wanting two people and thinks that one can do a good enough job. So she's terrific.
Let's see. And then there's a lot of love coming at you. Just Amy
Maybe
wants to
I
say how
should
much she
read some
appreciated
of
the
it.
entire interview, but specifically loved hearing about the process of your writing. She thanks you for that. And Beth really enjoyed the meeting, and thanks all of us, but mostly you, Thrity and Jen, for doing this. And
You, Jen.
on the topic of the writing process, Bree's asking if you consider yourself more of a plotter or a pantser.
What's the second one?
Pantser, fly by the seat of your pants.
Oh, yeah, definitely a pantser. Yeah, no, I never ever, I plot, but it's all in my head. I never write anything down on paper.
Wonderful.
So when you sit down after you've, cleaned the house and taken a shower and thought out everything, and you sit down, do you just type it out?
You guys are making a lot of assumptions. What does it mean, clean the house?
I don't know. Well, you said
never
you
heard
did,
that
you
before.
did the dishes or something. I just was
Okay,
going
I do
with
the
that.
dishes, but let's not get carried away here.
Okay.
What I usually do is I try and think of the next day's chapter or section before I actually sit down to do it. And very often I'll have a really good idea of what I want to accomplish on that given day, where I want the story to go. And often I can stick to that plan, and very often I don't. I have that outline of that chapter, but halfway through it, I see this interesting little path that opens up. So I go down that path, and then eventually I try and wind myself back to the main things just to keep the momentum of the plot or whatever it is going. So all I'm saying is I never sit in front of a blank screen, frozen, not having a clue what I'm going to do on that day. I always have a good idea. And it is being out in the world and being active. I mean, in pre-pandemic days when we used to go to the movies, I could be sitting through watching a movie and I would emerge out of the theater knowing what I was going to do with my book the next day, right? Because some part of me was thinking of my own work rather than what I had paid money to watch on the screen. So, it's all of those things.
So I have two comments about that. One is that, I take this dance class with Louisa that we've been dancing together for almost 20 years now, which is a lot of time. And in the dance class, there are a lot of times where at the end of the class, I've solved lots of different problems. I've worked through and thought about lots of issues, and I have solutions at the end. So I understand that. And then my other comment is that, I've talked to a lot of authors over the past 5 years, and I find that the authors that don't give themselves a minimum of how many words to write each day and sit down every day at 9 o'clock in the morning and write for 3 hours, X amount of words, the authors that kind of go with the flow and, the story emerges and takes them to the ending, those are the kinds of books that I am most attracted to and enjoy the most. So I think it's just a different kind of writer. It's a different process. But for me, that's the process that I connect with as a reader.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, I'm just, there was a time in my life, like when I wrote my first novel, as I mentioned earlier, I had so little time that I had to be disciplined. And I did that, frankly, for several of my first few books. Life was just in some ways easier. It wasn't nearly as, trying to do everything at one time. So it was possible to set the alarm for a certain time, turn it off, write for so many hours, then get dressed and start real life stuff. And I don't know, I think in the last 4 or 5 books, it's like the wheels have fallen off or something. And now it's like catch as you can, If I have 15 minutes one day, I'll write for those 15 minutes. And then if I have to go 2-3 days without writing, I won't be typing, but I'll be writing in my head. So I'm okay with that. I've just freed myself up because I know that I'm serious about the work, and I'm only serious about the work because I'm not disciplined about the work. I said this in another forum the other day, people were just talking about process and schedule and discipline. And I said, I don't write for any of those reasons. I just write because it makes me happy. And writers talk so much about discipline and writing every day and all that. And it's like it sucks all the fun out of it. Every single person who writes because it gives them joy, So I would rather have that joy than be punitive about it,
Well, it's working for you and it's working for us. So thank you.
Thanks.
Indeed. And again, there's just, we'll sort of wrap up the questions here. Mostly a lot of love and comments. Marina in particular is talking about, she listened to the book while going on her walks, and she had no idea that both women's voices were done by the same reader.
Oh, wow.
So that's cool. And then Marcel was asking if you start with the ending in mind. I kind of feel like you might have addressed that, but I'm wondering if you had anything to add about this particular book, if you had the ending in mind.
I don't think so. I mean, sometimes I do. Sometimes I'll know. I wrote a book called Everybody's Son a few years ago. That whole book came to me in the shower with the names of the characters attached in 15 seconds. The whole book. Just, it was like that. It was done. I literally got out of the shower and started writing it. So once in a while you get lucky like that, but that doesn't happen all the time. I'm sorry, Susan has another question. You mind if she can ask it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's just two things. One, when you were just talking about just you write it because it makes you happy. And it goes back to what you were saying originally. When you read those original articles, you were so angry and upset. But when you wrote the book, I've had similar things because I'm an actor and a writer. And when I didn't understand QAnon, and it was making me so angry and upset, but then I became curious, and I got into the world of that and into a person who would go down that rabbit hole. And it's a way of being curious about the world and what's going on around us. And I really appreciated that from your writing. And then because of your specificity, it becomes universal. And when you were talking about Trump before, and I love Mina because I think she's the wisest woman in this whole book. And there was this one thing on page 131, and I think it's so poignant because of everything that's going on. Mina says, I'm going to cry. As children, we were taught to be afraid of tigers and lions. Nobody taught us what I know today. The most dangerous animal in this world is a man with wounded pride. And I started thinking, think about Putin and think about Trump and think about Mina's situation. So because you write from such a honest place and specific place, it all of a sudden reveals so much. And I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay.
All right. I think, are we all set with all the questions?
Yeah, Jill is just saying that she copied down that quote, the one that Susan, I think you just read, because she thought it was so brilliant and insightful.
Thank you.
And then that does wrap up our questions. Thank you all so much for asking them.
All
Oh,
right.
I have to say one more thing.
Okay.
I would feel bad. I'd be frustrated afterwards if I hadn't said this to you. Because again, when Smita is writing, when she's deciding what to do, and she says, maybe in the end, that's all that love was, doing the hard thing, not roses and Valentines and walks on the beach, but simply being present day after ordinary day, the extraordinary romanticism of ordinary life. If I could just teach my husband that. And then I love how her ex-boyfriend said, you know what your problem is, Smita? You focus on the cat hair, try focusing on the cat. I think that is another bit of wisdom. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you for reminding me of these. You know, I've written the book a few years ago, so.
Right.
And
Yeah,
I know
there are a lot of gems in there. You should read it someday.
someday, yeah.
Thank
So-
you so much. This has really been so great. We appreciate you being here with us, and on behalf of everyone, I just want to thank you. And you know, I have all of the comments were recorded, so I'll send you an email with some of the
Oh, I would love to
comments.
see it.
so you
I would
can
love to see those. And Jennifer, what I said earlier holds some of the most insightful questions that I've ever received. So bravo, and thank you for
Okay,
that.
great.
Louisa, thank you for doing this. And for all of you who took time out of your lives to attend, I'm so grateful to all of you.
Thank you so much. If anyone wants to take themselves off camera, I'm going to do a little group photo. I'm in gallery. So if you'd
Oh, you're in
like
gallery. Okay.
part of that and say hello with your lovely faces, we'll just preserve this wonderful moment. We have 2 screens worth of people, but we'll just
Yeah,
go
I
with
should
anyone who
look at
wants to.
some of the other people. I only have a few on my screen.
If you go into gallery view, or I could unpin us.
Gallery. Oh, yeah, I should do
You
that.
got it? Yeah,
Oh,
anyone who
yeah,
wants to
yeah,
see
yeah.
it's in gallery view. So thank you guys for showing your faces. I'll take a few shots. And we're just delighted to have you all here so much. And
Thank you. This was an extraordinary opportunity. Thanks, everybody. I've been out of commission. It was lousy timing to have the surgery. Oh, this is all still being recorded, so I better.
We'll cut
We
it
can
down.
edit.
We're gonna edit it so we don't
Okay.
have a lot of.
You know, so I missed about a month of promotion that I should have been doing
Wow.
after the book launched. So just sort of getting back into the swing of things a little bit at a time. So this was a great start. Thank you.
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right, have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, all of you too.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.
night.